you'd add some more new sand. And they had these big machines called sand cutters. They looked like a big rotary lawnmower, but it was probably 8 foot wide and 3 foot. The beater was at least 3 foot deep on the thing. And you had an operator that these sand piles was in after you get the molds. At the end of the day, would be a windrow of sand. And the molder would put the water to the sand, and the little sand cutter would go back and forth through that. And as he was going back and forth, he kept pushing it nearer and nearer the wall, so when he got all done, he had a pile against the wall. And then the molder, when he started molding the next morning, the molder's floors were probably nearly as long as this room.
Yeah. Really?
And you started out in the morning with your first mold, and you went out because the iron was on a track, and they couldn't take that. I mean, you had to go get that. Mm-hmm. And so you started out on the aisle where the iron was, but you'd have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of them molds, or depending on how we were pouring, you get 2 rows or 4 rows, and you pour them, and you shake them out. Shake the castings out of the sand and the sand out of the molds in the windrow. And you take your shovel and shovel it up, and then you start rows right next to this windrow, so you save room, because nobody had a floor big enough where they could mold all day without shaking out or moving some molds, because they made so many molds, other than the bench molds. This here is slow. If you got 50 molds out of a bench molder a day, he really had to...
He had to put in 10 hours.
He had to put in a lot of time. It was more like 15, 20, 25 molds what a bench molder.
Well, everything's done to hand.
But these squeezer molders, the 100 was the number that, if you didn't have 100, you could expect a visit from somebody wondering where you'd been. You just had to make... And this type of mold right here, the man, this is beyond the bench plate work, really. This type of mold,
Pridmore too,
right here, and the Pridmores. But again, you're talking 75 molds a day with this type of mold, at least on the things. So I got to tell, it's nothing to do with this. But when we closed the foundry in 1972, we had a new molding machine that was a international molding machine, and the flask was 3 foot square. And I got to stop and think and make sure I get the thing. But each half, whatever the depth was, weighed a half a ton, 1,000 pounds. So when you put them all together, you had a ton. And Big Eddie Stewart, I don't know if you ever knew Eddie Stewart or not, lived down in Barnet, ran that machine, and you gave him 2 helpers, and they made 55 molds a day, which is 55 tons of sand, and they shovel it all off on the floor. Well, they use bigger shovels than this. They use big scoop shovels. But them guys made 55 molds a day. Wow. And made 2 or 3 pattern changes. This is when we were making castings for GE and stator frames for the motors. And that's what they made. And the sad thing was, we had overhead sand hitched from the muller, or the machine that prepares the sand. We had all new conveyor and everything hitched to that machine, ready to have overhead sand where you wouldn't have to shovel the sand. When they announced the closing of the foundry, then it probably would have taken me 16 hours to hitch that to the machine so we could give him sand, and they wouldn't let me hitch it up. That was from January to June. It was 6 months that man kept right on shoveling the 55 ton a day when they wouldn't let us spend the time to do that.
Changing the subject, they used to pour these 50-pound test weights, pipe panel test weights. You've seen those. And there was, 2 of them all.
Yep.
So they had 100 pounds of castings, plus all the gates and risers and whatever. And this was such a heavy chunk of it that they'd go up and get about 700 pounds out of a cupola in this great big bowl. Then they'd come down, and they'd get it on there, and the mold would look at it. Yep, he'd go over and get some scrap and dump it in there to cool that metal down because it wouldn't shrink. Well, that was fine, except for one thing. If you had a fleck of rust that big, you emptied that 750 pounds right to the ceiling. I was down there one day, working right in the area, and they were getting ready to pour off. Well, anyway, they come down, and that's what Bill Payette.
Yep.
He looked at it. He went over and got, I think, an old frame or something. Didn't make any difference. Put it in there, and that thing went.
And it goes off like a bomb too. It's not quite.
Really?
Oh, it was just gone like this.
Wow.
One bang.
And it's like a Roman candle. When it goes up, it was just red, and it would break it all up into particles.
Yeah.
And it would come around and land on the floor.
Red hot rain.
And it looked like kernels of corn all over the floor.
Wow. But about the time that went bang, believe me, I was from here to over there before it ever hit the. Old Bill stood there and that stuff was coming down around my way.
And it was a funny thing, we had very, very few burns from that type of accident. The guys just pump up and let it run off. Especially they were always sweaty. And a lot of the molders worked summer and winter, bareback. And the water running right off them. And that kept them from getting burned. That iron hit that sweaty body, and it would, like you'd hear it, and away it was gone. It wouldn't stick to you. Like it would dry. The stuff would burrow right in. And we started about the sand. I got away from that too. That this sand here is, or I was talking about the Albany sand with the clay, and then we went to what they call synthetic sand, which is the New Jersey. Most of it also comes from McConnelsville, New York, but what we used, and there was a reason for that. It was a different grain. One is angular and one is semi-angular, and we wanted the angular. I believe it was to pack better. But anyway, the silica sands come with no clay in it whatsoever, and so you have to add clay. And there's a formula that's approximately 10% clay to the sand, or 1,000 pounds of sand, or 100 pounds of clay. And that gives you what we call 10 pounds green strength, which this sand is close to it, but not quite, I don't think. And we also call this green sand because it's got moisture. You got dry sand mold, and I got the no bakes and all of the things, and the oil sands that are baked. But this is green sand because it does have the moisture. But the bad thing about this was when we started using the synthetic sand, now this machine, this big beater we had, the sand cutter, cannot cut this and put strength back in. You can put the water back in, but you cannot put the strength back in so it has any body to hold it together. It's got to go to a machine, sand mixing machine, it's called a Muller. Had the big wheels that weigh 1,000, 1,500 pounds a piece. There's two of them each side of the thing, and it goes round and round and round, and they run just off on the bottom of this big machine, and there's two blades. One is reversed, one rolls the sand over from the outside in, and there's a short one curved the same way that rolls the sand from the inside out, and all the time these wheels are running on it. So they got to be mulled about 3 minutes. And that's then when we started doing that, every bit of that sand in that foundry had to be picked up, put through that machine, and taken back to the floors. And we had one machine that had over 100 tons of sand on it. It was between 200 and 300 tons of sand every night that had to be picked up and moved. In that night crew, I had that before, and that was the lowest job in the world as far as anybody having respect for you or anything. Hey, you're on a night crew, it's a cleanup crew. But that was the most important job down there, because if you had a breakdown or you couldn't get the sand ready in the morning, now you got 100 molders in there, or 100 people coming in, 100 molders, but actually it was 130 people when we closed the foundry, coming to work and nothing to do because the sand isn't ready. So that thing, you got to cobble it up, and the maintenance people used to be so mad at us. We would cobble stuff up, machinery. We would blow fuses while we wasn't electrocuted. We'd go steal fuses from one place and stick them in somewhere to keep the stuff going, because we didn't have a maintenance man. Yeah. They wouldn't give us a maintenance. Such a small crew, they wouldn't give us a maintenance man at night. And if you had a real serious breakdown, you had to bring a maintenance man in, and they all lived 40 miles away. And we started the night crew. Started at 4 o'clock, and supposedly we were done at midnight. But I have seen my payloader operators get right at 6 or 6:30 when the molder started in the foundry in the daytime. In the morning, I've seen them payloader operators just swap drivers. We wouldn't be done, but we would have somewhere. Everybody could have some, but them payloader operators would go to them. Then payloaders sometimes would run 24 hours a day. And we had 3 of them. We ran 2, and we had 3 had to spare to so that we could always have two going, but it was quite the thing.
These mullers, did they just mix the sand?
Yeah,
Or did they
mixed
add anything to it? Or?
No, an operator did that, although we did have one automatic machine. This machine I told you had the 110. A night we did put what we call a speed muller on that, and that was all automatic, and we had that for a couple of years, I guess, a couple of 3 years, and that would add the clay, that would add the water, but it was fast. That thing would let the sand in there, and it would add the water, add the clay, and within a minute it would dump it. But it was a smaller capacity. I think it was only 1,500 pounds. It wasn't as big as the big mullers. But them little speed mullers were something else. And it took us almost a year to get rid of the operator. We couldn't make the thing work. We had an operator, and he wouldn't leave it alone. He was always twixting it, because he knows what he was supposed to be getting. And the old machine is not smart enough. You tell it what to do, and it'll do it. If it's right or wrong, it's going to keep right on doing it. And that's what would bother the operator. I mean, it might be a little bit too wet, and he'd go and cut the water back or whatever. And it was just always never working right. So finally we get mad and said, no, maintenance got to run this thing, and we don't want an operator, and took the operator away, and the maintenance guy would start it in the morning and walk away from it. And if we had a problem, the operator down on the floor underneath it would have to call, and sometimes we did spoil some sand, but it worked good. It worked good.
Were you there when they had the old merry-go-round with the sweep?
Sure. Yeah. That was the Albany sand, which this old sweep, another type of cutting.
But they had a turntable, and they had two complete sets of patterns on there. And they had a sand slinger, which is an automatic ramming device.
You did the ramming. You didn't have to.
You didn't touch it. But you had a guy running his head, and every once in a while, with the damnedest bang you ever heard, a piece of iron went through there, and everything came to a screeching halt. And that made what, one turn a minute? Two turns.
It made a mold a minute. It made a complete cycle in 2 minutes, 60 mold an hour.
Times 54. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it would make 60 molds.
60 molds an hour.
An hour. Which it was two turns, because there was two complete molds on there. So every minute a mold come off. Yeah. But it was. Boy, it took 2 minutes to make the complete circle to get the two molds off. It was a set.
And there was two guys here where they came down from where they shook the castings out, picking these steel molds up, setting them on there.
And they all weighed at least 150 pounds.
Before that, when it got hardly by, here was the other half to put on. And then this was.
It was 14 minutes.
9 hours a day
on this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And you could make the mold a minute there, and they finally took it out because the excuse they gave us it was overproducing. It was. I mean, they didn't have enough other tonnage. The sand slinger itself, that type of molds, would not. You had to. The minute you started running that machine, you had to start running the cupola. You had to start melting iron because there wasn't the capacity to store molds. So once that started, you had to have the iron come in, but there wasn't iron enough in other places of the foundry, so you had to shut the thing down, only run 4 hours a day, start later in the day or something, and whatever. And so they took the merry-go-round out, and they kept it with a pair of machines, stationary, what we call rollovers, on there, and Miss Man, that took care of the overproducing. it was unbelievable. And the thing that got me, they brought, which I shouldn't bring this up, but they brought consultants in there that old machine. When you took the molds off, they went on a power conveyor, and they went around the corner, and the conveyor you poured on was powered, so the molds was moving all the time. And then there was two guys that shook them up, put them through the shaker, and they came down. Dead rolls, but it was downhill, so they pushed easy. And these guys come in and they slowed that thing down, and they took every bit of power off of that. The molds all had to be pushed by hand, and I'm talking molds now that weigh 1,200–1,500 pounds probably, the size of them. And they had to push them all by hand. They took away a lot of the capacity, so we had more storage area for the molds. But all the transfer and everything was all but anyway, again, that's history.
They had a little guy taking off the casting.
So I guess we got sand and we got everything.
And honestly, he wasn't
With the
just tall.
sand,
And these castings were red hot. And here he had a pair of just pads.
We called them pads. All they had was a thumb and a palm, and a strap across the back of
He
his wrist.
picked these red hot castings up, and some of them he was literally putting them up this high, wasn't he? Remember Brownie?
Little guy.
And the water was just pouring off of them all day long.
Poor little Gus, a lot of times, after we got rid of him, we had to put two people on. One couldn't stand the heat, and I don't still say the height of him. I don't think he was over 5'2".
He's about this big.
He was a little guy, and he was an alcoholic. Lived alone over in Hardwick, and he'd come to work some mornings just about go, but after the heat got to him, it straightened him out. But he'd go all this sometimes no lunch. That poor little cuss. But he could stand that iron, and unbelievable.
One time over in Hardwick on the weekend, it was probably warm day, 20, 25 below zero, and I think he laid out in the snowbank from Saturday night till Sunday morning. Monday morning, he right back into Fairbanks again. If anybody else had been sober, he would have frozen.
Are we ready to make them all?
well, I just had one question about the sand. You said there was different size grits to the sand. Was that in numbers?
Yeah, they was art, double art, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we ended up with one sand. One of the things we did for many years over there, we poured brass. We had our own brass foundry also, and then we combined the brass foundry and a brass and aluminum foundry, and then plus the iron foundry, and then we moved the brass and the aluminum over into the iron foundry. And the brass foundry was changed so that it was all core room, because the core room was in that building. And we were making so many cores with this air set cores and all of that. And we moved it over into the iron foundry, and you had two separate systems. The brass and aluminum was one sand and a finer sand, and you couldn't mix them in the same machine because you contaminated them. So, but it was so hard, and finally we jobbed out all of the brass and aluminum and had only the cast iron left, and there was also lead when we had the iron, the aluminum. But we poured a lot of we poured a ton of aluminum a day, and day after day after day, and a ton of brass day after day after day at one time, and then the scales that took the brass beams and stuff started going out of
die cast.
They went to die cast, and they started going obsolete. We stopped making as many of them, but we went to die castings on some of them, which was made the better casting, and then the brass pretty much went down the tube, and we had quite a lot of aluminum. And matter of fact, I went down to the foundry where we got all this stuff. Well, not the parent foundry, where Slim and Rose worked, General Foundry, Bob Rosine's foundry. They worked for them for years. And they were making about all of our aluminum there, and then Rose and Slim give a plug to them, because this is where we get all the equipment. Yeah. Not all of it, but the flies and the sand. And they started their own little hemlock foundry there in Charlestown. So, yeah. So that's...
All right. Let's make it.
Okay, molder, make it.
Okay, we'll try and make a mold and see if we can remember. The first thing we need is a mold board, which is the bottom board right there. And then the first set of pliers, which is the drag. And then we need some patterns. And we're going to use this one, the Fairbanks Morse logo for one. And we're going to place it in there. And we got another little Fairbanks nameplate.
That's from back in the day one.
And that's an oldie. Like I say, that's I don't know how old, but 1800 material. Yeah. That goes back. And then we got a little two-parted job of a poise, miniature poise that we're going to try and make. Make sure we get the right half. There's two halves. There's a cope and drag side to it. And we want to smooth, and the other one's got pins. I don't know if you can see it here. Yeah. And that holds it in place
that's
when you get on the other side. It keeps them lined up. I don't know if I do it this way. you this way. Yeah, I want to pour 2 up.
You want to pour 2 up?
Yeah, I'm going to pour
You're going
2
to gate onto the end?
on the ends of these, yeah.
You ought to turn it around then, hadn't you? How are you going to gate? In here?
No, I'm going to get
on the end,
ends.
okay.
Seeing it's, I wouldn't if I was going to make the casting. But it's easy here, room-wise.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would turn it around if I was going to, let's see.
Actually make the mold.
I got room enough to pour here and riser here. Pour there. Pour here. Don't need a riser on that one, although I'll cut one. I'm going to put a big one on this. No, I don't need it, but I'm going to put a big one on this one just to show. Yeah, I can cheat. Right there. Okay. Then the next thing that comes is the potting on the, which is the talc, on the pattern so the sand won't stick to them. And then we're ready for sand. We'll try not to make a mess, so we'll leave it in the buckets. Yeah. It should be on the floor where you get right down and bend over.
Well, you're keeping it fractures, lugging in all those fish section, right?
Yeah. And one of the things years and years ago you never see on a molder was a belly. All the molds, when you lug them, especially these squeezer molds I'm talking about, which is the majority of the molders, the mold didn't have a steel flask. It was made in one, and you took the flask off, and all there was a board under it. So when you lug the thing out, and the smallest one was 100 pounds, 12 by 12, well, it might be slightly less, but most of them were 6 over 6, and 12 inches square, which is 100 pounds. And that was the smallest one, and they were up to 200. And you lugged them on a board, no flask, and on your fingers, and you couldn't put them against your belly. So you lugged them out. And I've gone in mornings when I was making them big molds and get out to the end of my floor and go to put the thing down, and I get down within a foot of the floor, and I can't bend anymore. You're just so stiff. They talk about now, the founders of the guys with backaches, they just can't keep the people working, they have backache. Well, backache is part of a molder. I mean, that's not an injury or anything else, that's just part of the job. But anyway, the thing, and it's so heavy you can't pick it back up, so you drop it. And you come back and you start over, and about 2 or 3 of them dropped to be the most, and then you couldn't bend your knees, because you bend your knees, you hit the most. So you had to go straight down. I mean,
and that's clear down to here.
And the molders could do that. They could go right down to the knuckles to the floor without bending their knees. And I say they didn't have the bellies. That was something they didn't have. I'm going to mix this up a little bit to get rid of it. I want moisture.
A little wetter down in there, maybe?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
It's good there.
All right, it's good.
It's good there. And I think the shovel will go right in pail.
What's in the coffee can?
That's what they had the party in. That's what they had the party in.
No,
And when you had a molder, this bench is a lot bigger than the bench that you would have wouldn't only be about this wide at the most. And then you'd have another bench that would at a 90-degree angle. And when you took it apart and everything, you turned, and so you had two work areas rather than long like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had a sand pile, and the shovel, you always threw the thing down this way here on your sand pile. You always threw it down. You didn't stand it up or anything. You threw it down. Huh. And you reached down and grabbed the thing here, and it was ready to take a shovelful to save on the move. But then, let's see, it was just a question of covering the pattern with the riddle sand. And another thing you riddle it for is to get the impurities out of there. In an aluminum foundry, there's no way of getting the aluminum, and you can get hurt, because everything the metal it runs, it makes little icicles. If a metal runs, and when on top, and you pour the mold and everything, spatters, and they're little sharp devils, they're little flat pieces, or like needles, and they get in. I was hoping I was going to come to some, in here. And that's another thing, what you riddle it for is that's how you get it out, because magnets won't take the aluminum out, where in iron, not saying all run over magnets. The belts, the conveyors, at the ends of them had magnets. And the magnets would hang on to the metal, then pull it down to the bottom, and quick the belt ran by the magnet, it would drop off. And the sand would go into the elevators, and away it would go. But I'll keep going, maybe I can find some trash in here, cigarette butts and everything else. That's one thing that you used to do in the family. You spit in your own sand pile, but you didn't better not catch somebody spitting in yours. That's a piece of brass. Huh.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a piece of brass. Okay, that's enough of the riddle.
So the riddled sand covered the pattern, and then you could add.
Now you can add, yeah. That out like that. One thing you got to be careful when you're molding is moving that riddled sand on the pattern, because you get what you call a ram-by. When you riddle, you got an impression. If you start ramming, you got an impression. And if you move the sand, it slides over and you make another impression. So you got to be careful that you don't move the... And that's another thing you do, is you tap your shovel to get the sand off, because when you come up here to ram, it comes down your neck. Now I'm peening. This is to make the edge. Keep it valley level. Probably the easiest thing, dump the pail right in there. They see what the shovel does.
Not enough?
I don't think so. Got to have a little more.
One more?
Yeah. There we go.
You got enough now.
Now we got it all up there. Now we're going to use one of the rams. I think we talked about the man putting the things so it wouldn't come off and it's smooth, doesn't hurt your hand. And ram it any way you want to, but my method is down the middle first. That's as hard as it needs to be. Get this out of the way. This is a strike. Make it smooth. And then you take this sand here, and this is what you call bedding sand. And if you got any pockets or anything in there, when you take